Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live session. This time I have the pleasure to talk to Brittany. And I'm additionally excited about finally interviewing a woman again. So hi, Brittany, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
So a brief introduction about you is basically that you are the editor of Better Marketing, one of the most popular publications on Medium in general, the marketing publication of Medium with a huge following. So I'm assuming that you're reviewing hundreds of articles every single month. But before we dive into the specifics of your work and your insights, tips, tricks, and secrets, why don't you share a little bit about you and your background, and especially how you tapped into writing and editing?
Yeah, sure. So I live in Richmond, Virginia now, but I've kind of worked all over the place. I have been writing on Medium for almost a decade now, and I've always done work that's with marketing and creative stuff. I studied marketing and psychology in college, and then I actually worked in the nonprofit sector for a while. I did a service year with AmeriCorps and worked for Habitat for Humanity in DC, and then I got into the international education field and then taught abroad in Thailand briefly, and then I moved to Australia. And that's when I really got into more of the editor and publishing side of my experience. I ran a publication about podcasts as sort of a side project that was one of the first Medium partner publications when they first started their publications back in, 2013 or 14. And then I also worked as editor for a blog for a creative community. And yeah, so I guess that's how I got into it. I started with Better Marketing actually when it first started. And before that, I worked with Better Humans and Better Programming, which are our other two publications in sort of the Better Publishing umbrella, we call it. I worked as their first copy editor for Better Humans, I think 4 years ago. And then grew from there and became the lead copy editor. And as we grew a whole copy editing team, and then I became the editor of Better Marketing in September.
Cool. I didn't know that your history with the Better umbrella is goes back for such a long time. That's exciting. So you must have actually reviewed or seen thousands and thousands of submissions so far.
Yeah.
And that's actually my first question that I'd love to ask. And I know it's a very big and broad question, but maybe we can boil it down into some of the essentials. With those tons of submissions that you're reviewing, what are, from your perspective, the main differentiators between a great Better Marketing article that has a high potential, that is really engaging, that readers love to read, versus an article that immediately gets rejected at first sight?
Yeah. Well, there's a big range there, I guess. I'm lucky we get a lot of submissions, and so I get to spend all day reading articles, which is fun, but also rejecting a lot of articles, which is not a fun part of my job. And I think if I boil it down to a couple of points, well, we just redid our tagline for our publication. We changed it to by marketers for marketers. And I think lately I've been really leaning into that more and trying to find that expertise or that knowledge that the author has, and to publish things that are actually useful for marketers and people who, I use marketers in kind of a general sense, people who do marketing or have to, promote themselves or their product or their brand in some way. So I really look for articles that teach me something new, or that are actually useful in that, if you're in a marketing agency, you might post it on your team Slack or send it to your coworkers and say, hey, this is a new idea, or what can we learn from this? Or something that's, surprising or interesting. I really like when I learn something from an article that tends to make it more of a yes. Or when there's a question from the title that I'm intrigued by, and then there's a surprising answer, or there's some sort of unpredictability about it. I think that makes a good article. If it's not super memorable, that tends to be something that leads to more rejections, or something that we've heard a lot before. We get a lot of articles that I think are people writing what they think we want to see rather than what they're interested in. And I can always tell, I think I can tell when an author is actually interested in it versus kind of writing what they think we might publish, or doing research on something that they're not super excited about. I think that personal experience, or at least some enthusiasm, kind of comes across in your writing style and how authors approach a topic.
That's interesting. What are those topics that people think you want to see? What the first thing that came to my mind is that they probably try to copy or redo very trending articles.
Yeah.
Is that the main thing, or are there any other tendencies that people think you are looking for, but it's actually not what you're looking for?
Yeah, it was funny when I started full-time in this role in September. We got there was like a month where we got so many articles about Burger King, and I was like, does everyone, like, I don't really think about Burger King that much. Like, is this something I'm missing? Is Burger King like the hot trendy thing for all marketers to talk about? Like, what's going on? I swear I would get like 5 pitches a day sometimes about Burger King things. And then I finally realized it was something that had been covered in our publication and had done well. And so folks were kind of copying it, and that made more sense. But things like that, like, I can definitely tell. And it's a reason that I reject articles, which is hard because sometimes people write something and then I'll reject it and they'll say, what do you mean? You just published something like this a week ago. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's why we don't want to run. Yeah. Which will cover things if there's something new to say about it, or a different take, especially if it's something sort of, controversial or interesting, where there might be multiple opinions, and we want to kind of represent those equally in our publication. If there's, I don't know, a new Facebook policy or something that's a little more nuanced. But yeah, I think things that have been covered before, and what else?
Do you think there is a best practice to learning from those super viral trending articles like the Burger King ones? Like, if I see that and I'm like, okay, I think that it's a cool story and it resonates with my style, and I would like to write something similar, but I should probably not write the exact same thing. How could you learn from those articles and turn it into a potentially great article in the future? Do you think there is a best practice or some ways to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that there are a lot of commonalities that popular articles have. And I think it really is more to do with journalism concepts than anything else. It's got like a story arc and something like a conflict in the beginning and something interesting. Like, that's a lot of our stories, especially the case studies on advertising or different marketing campaigns, have that. So I think that's a case where studying the way that the story flows and the way that the author tells the story can be really helpful. And being able to separate that from the actual content, from the actual Burger King thing, into, what are other stories that fit this formula, or like, how can I take something that's interesting to me and then fit it in a way that's intriguing and will be compelling to draw a reader in. I think that's definitely something that can be valuable. We do get a lot of writing advice articles, which are, kind of like taking that and breaking down articles and then saying this is what makes a good article work. And those I think are helpful for authors to read, but also I think I learn better from learning examples of good writing and reading books and reading articles around the internet than reading something about writing. So I think being able to study why something works is helpful. But then, it runs the risk of being formulaic, where you can kind of feel where writers are setting up the structure and then it feels a little forced. So I think it's tricky. Yeah.
Do you have a personal way of, studying writing without focusing too much on the writing? So when you read articles or books that you don't review for the publication, but that you read in your spare time, do you have any kind of main questions or main thoughts that help you to also sort of distinguish good writing from boring writing, for example?
Yeah, good question. I think I will say that I definitely identify more as an editor than a writer. I like being able to help people define their own voice, and I like to focus on others more than on myself, which is probably why I was nervous about this interview, because I like being more behind the scenes than in the spotlight. So in my own writing, especially in the editorial role, it's more about others and, great articles that I've read or that we've published and trying to highlight and share their work. But I think for me, I tend to write something and then just kind of get everything on the page, and then go back and try to figure out why it's not interesting. When you write something and you're like, okay, this is how I would word vomit it to a friend, or this is how I would just kind of get all the facts together, and then what structure makes that interesting. And sometimes it's as simple as, getting rid of the introduction because it's not necessary, or moving things around so that you lead with a more interesting point, and it's more structural than it is. If you have all the pieces together, then it's more about moving them around in a way that is compelling and isn't just kind of straightforward and bland.
Cool. And the next question I actually wanted to discuss is related to that, and you already slightly touched on it. It would be what makes a marketing story or a story in general really engaging and worth reading. And you already mentioned the kind of storyline. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's really how and I personally believe that this engagement factor is incredibly important, especially on Medium. The more writers you have on a platform, and the more points or the more opportunities readers have, the more important it is to write something that's not only valuable but also interesting to read. And I know that a lot of your trending and viral stories on Better Marketing are really engaging, and that's why people stick with it. They have actionable takeaways for the marketer, but they are also really fun to read. Do you feel like there's anything those stories have in common, and how could new writers replicate that?
Yeah, good question. I think you got it exactly right. And one point of feedback that I'll often give writers when things are an almost yes is to prompt them to write more about what the takeaway is for a marketing person, because often they have a great story or a cool case study about a campaign that they like or a new feature, but it's missing that conclusion that's like, if you're in marketing, what does this mean for you, or how could you use this, and kind of flipping the focus to the reader on what they can actually take away from it. And so I think that's something that we focus on because we do want to, we kind of think of ourselves as like a great daily read for marketers, in that if you kind of scan the headlines of the day, then you'll hopefully find something that will be helpful for your work. And like sometimes that's a really specific takeaway that is a little less story oriented, just like a tutorial about how to create shorts on YouTube or to try out a new Instagram feature or something like that. But there's also, I think, the more deeper and emotionally engaging, inspirational or creative pieces that can get people thinking about how to do their jobs better or how to market their work better. And yeah, I think we have a good balance of that. But that balance between sort of and it depends what type of article is, whether it's a tutorial that's more straightforward, where you don't exactly need and you don't maybe want all the fluff and kind of compelling things. It's like going to a recipe blog when you are looking for the recipe and you get a whole story about the person's husband and her kids, and you're like, I really just want to know how to make this pie, So we definitely look at our articles differently depending on what the intended outcome is and what the reader wants to get out of it.
Cool. We already mentioned a few of them, but you have different types of articles you publish, but across the board, are there any absolute no-goes first-time better marketing writers should know, or generally writers who are about to have their first submissions to popular medium publications?
Yeah, we have a few things that are, well, I would say there's a few like immediate deal breakers, and then there are some things that we'll work with writers on. Plagiarism obviously is a no-go for us. And articles also that have been covered just a lot. I've got a list on our Write For Us page of brands that we probably won't say yes to. Things like a case study about Apple or Nike or Elon Musk. Like I've just heard it so many times, and it's unlikely that it's going to be a new take. So we're pretty critical of things that have been covered a lot. Anything that's rude or mean or condescending is a no for us. I always try to stay on the positive side of things, which is not to say that writers can't be critical about, say it's an article about, I don't know, email marketing services. Like it's okay to say this one is better than this one in my opinion because of this, but we don't want to publish things that are just trashing companies or saying that this product sucks or whatever. And then also, we try to avoid telling people what they should be doing, which is a philosophy that really the previous editor, Nick, kind of stuck to, and I think did a good job of writing about and putting in our Write For Us guide, is that we're not in the business of telling people how they should be living their lives or how they should be doing their marketing campaigns, or, like we can offer advice, but I rejected an article this morning that was like, if you're not doing this thing, you're an amateur. And like, that's just mean. We don't need to be mean to people. So things that are negative, let's see. Oh, and I have a hard rule that if we publish a list of anything, like a list of, great podcasts to listen to or great books to read or people to follow on Twitter, if the list is only white men, then I won't publish it, and I'll bounce it back to the author and say, try a little harder, like find the more diverse list, because that's not something that I want to publish. And it's something we've done in the past, not probably in better marketing, but definitely an article on better programming we published that was a list of white guys, and we kind of got slammed for it on Twitter, and rightfully so. And it was a good learning experience for me to pay attention to the diversity of lists that we publish and people that we're highlighting, which usually it's like pretty well received. So that pretty often the writers will be like, oh, I didn't even notice. Sorry, let me try again. And, it's a learning opportunity for both of us.
Yeah, nice. And with the amateur in the title, what you mentioned, if the title itself is the problem, but you like the idea of the content, do you work with the writer? What's kind of the best practice for a writer in that case? If you like, do you immediately tell them, okay, I like the story, but we need to work on the title? Or if they get rejected, do you want them to resubmit with a new title? Because that's a question we often receive. Like, if I get rejected, should I make some tweaks based on what I think and submit again? Is that something you guys, maybe in the Better publishing family overall, like to see? Or is that a no-go? Does that put a bad light on a new writer from your perspective?
Gosh, I don't know. I think, so to take that article from this morning in particular, I read the title, but also the article. Like I try not to flash judge an article just based on the title, unless it's clear that it's not a fit for us based on the topic. Because sometimes I'll get things like top cryptocurrency or like stuff that has nothing to do with marketing, and then that's an easy rejection because it isn't within our topics that we write about. But for that one I did. And if it's something where it's like, okay, yeah, this is a good topic, but I don't love the framing of the title, I'll still read the article, or at least skim it and see whether it's something where it does need just an adjustment in the title, and the content itself is good, or whether the whole tone of the article is off and is something that, kind of matches what we don't want to publish. I think, and if the content is good and it is just that I don't love the title, then I would probably talk to the author about that and work with them on changing it. I think tweaking things and resubmitting, people do that. I think it could come off as a little spammy or like sneaky if it's not done well. But I think if they leave a comment on our submission form and say, hey, you rejected this, I agreed with your points, I made some changes, wanted to see if you like the second version, like that's great. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, cool.
And unfortunately, like I do try really hard to respond to every feedback request, but I don't respond to all of them just because it would take up my whole day if I didn't. And so that's hard because I try to find things that I can broadly tell people that would help them with their submissions. And especially when that's more specific, like, hey, we've covered this topic before, or we don't do these kind of posts, or, I like this concept, but didn't feel like it had anything helpful for a marketer. But if there's not something clear to point to, and or it's a little hard to say, or if it would require more coaching, that's just not something I have enough time for to help people.
No. So we covered some of the sort of no-goes and the best practices. Are there any points that you feel like are not absolute no-goes, but sort of make the article boring or not worth reading, or it might be a good idea, but there's just something in the writing that could be improved to make the article stand out a little more, especially once the reader has clicked on it and is reading through it, so that he really wants to read the entire piece? Are there any best practices on that, like how to avoid those simple and probably very common mistakes that make most articles boring instead of interesting and engaging?
Yeah. I think if we get some articles where I'll read the title and I've kind of think I know what it's about. And then if you read the whole article and you haven't learned anything new from what the title said, then that's probably an indicator that you might need to do more research or add something on, because you want to have an experience. Well, we want our readers to have an experience where they read the article and they learn something in the process. They're not just like, well, that was what it said and I kind of got the whole point from the title. On the other hand, we definitely avoid clickbaity titles and things that obscure what the reader's gonna read. Like this one thing will change the way you write or whatever. Often what I'll do is change where it says this one thing and reveal that information in the title, like to take away the obscure vagueness and just put in what they're actually talking about, and it's still just as compelling, but leaves the reader something to discover, and they're not like, I have no idea. I think the clickbaity titles also they run the risk of overselling what you're going to say, because if you're like, this one thing will change the way you write, and it's like, use Grammarly, then, everyone knows that Grammarly is a helpful tool, and that's great. And maybe it will change your writing if you struggle with grammar, but it's not. If you're reading that and you click on it and you already use Grammarly, then you're going to be disappointed when you get to the middle of the article and they're like, this is it. So I think a mix of having new information and kind of twists or interesting points in the article, while also staying true to having the title be pretty representative of what you're writing about, that can be helpful.
Yeah. And I think you actually have a lot of really great examples at Better Marketing. This is really interesting because I feel like your titles are really diverse. I'm not sure if that's true, but I feel like you have way fewer typical listicles and how-to articles than most other publications, or at least most popular publications, which makes it a good place to look for diverse and more not so common headline ideas also, if you want to have a collection that you want to look at. And I think it's just a really nice place to browse through for writers if you want to come up with new title ideas, even if you don't want to write about marketing, but you just want to get new ideas on how to write headlines. I think that the Better Marketing page is just a really nice place. I think that you are doing a good job at guiding your writers through that process of how to stand out in the title already.
Yeah, thanks. We definitely are pro experimentation. I don't have any sort of, this is what a Better Marketing title should look like, or what, we published an article once that was a one-word title, just to see how it would do, and the author wanted to try it, and I don't think it did great, but it was an experiment to see what would happen. So we're always kind of playing around with new things.
That's really great to hear, because I think that's also something a lot of writers are sometimes afraid of. They think that they need to do exactly what you have done in the past and probably what have worked in the past. And I think that's a nice way to get started. And it's nice to know what the publication is all about and what they are doing. And it's really nice to hear from someone like you that you are actually open to experimenting and to trying new things together with your writers. Because I think that a lot of people would not have the courage to ask for it, for example, for a one-word title. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I get really excited when people, I think trying new things is effortful. It doesn't take as much effort to write a formulaic, quote unquote, medium article that fits what you think it should look like. And it takes effort to do, a custom illustration or play with some drawings or to make something super long or super short. I think it shows that, I think that experimentation shows some intentionality, which is what we like.
If someone wants to do some sort of experiment and they want to get in touch with you before they submit because they just don't want to, or they just want to share a few words on why they did what they did. What's the best way to do that? Is it a private note inside the article? Like, imagine if someone would say they have a 2-minute article, but they really want to try something. They have a good point, and they just want to let you know about what they thought when they submit. What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, we've got if it's a form submission, like if they're not one of our current writers, there's a little box where you can put in things like notes or context. And if it's for our current writers, then it goes through Medium, and a private note is great at the top of the article. I have regular writers who do that a lot. It's also, it's a helpful way to add context. It's like some of my writers will just say, "Hey, Brittany, I came across this idea this weekend and had to write about it. Let me know what you think." Or to give me a heads up, like, "Hey, this is a little different, but wanted to give it a shot. Here's why." Or even to suggest like alternate titles. Authors will do that, and that's really helpful. So if you're writing something, you've got 3 titles and you're not sure which one is best, like pick one, but leave a comment with the other 2. And that's something that we'll consider and check out. Cause I'm going to go through that same process of considering whether it's the best title for the article. And if you've got alternates there, then, that's helpful to share them.
That's awesome.
Comment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I just want to, spend a few more seconds talking about that, because there might be writers who are super new and who don't know about that. You can actually write if you leave private comments on your own article, so those private notes, I think they're called, editors will see them, and you yourself will see them. It's a really powerful way to communicate with editors, because that's actually the only way to communicate easily. And I would highly encourage you to make use of that feature. Don't be annoying. Don't write essays in those private notes, but use it to share your thoughts with an editor, because it might be helpful, as Brittany just said.
Yeah, I will, if I can add to that, though, as like a small cautionary point. If you leave a private note on something, or if someone leaves a private note, those stay, and they'll stay there, and the editor of a publication can see them. So if you say, hypothetically, if you submit something to a different publication and gets rejected, and the editor leaves a rejection note, make sure you clear that note before you submit it to our publication, because I get articles all the time that have rejection notes from other editors still on there, because folks don't know that it shows up, and that, is a weird Medium feature. Yeah,
true. Thanks for adding that. I always forget to mention that. Cool. So I have one more question that I briefly want to talk about. And after that, we will actually look at the comment section. So if you have any questions that you want us to discuss, if you have anything you want Brittany to answer, you can already leave them in the comments box, and we will get to those questions in just a few minutes. And the last thing I wanted to chat about is actually plagiarism, because you recently shared an article that you've written in our Facebook group, and I think it was really helpful for a ton of writers. So it was all about plagiarism and how it can sometimes even happen accidentally, and why different people, depending on their location and depending on their education, might even interpret plagiarism differently. And you already mentioned this is one of the absolute no-goes for your publication. I think it's fair to say that's actually a big no-go on Medium overall. Unfortunately, you don't get penalized for that immediately, so it sometimes happens. Do you want to briefly introduce what accidental plagiarism is, and the concept that you basically explained in your article? Because I think that's actually something very new and helpful, to be honest, to a lot of new writers.
Yeah, sure. So something I wrote because I felt like I needed a resource to explain it to writers, because I was running into it a lot, where I'd either have to pull articles I'd already said yes to, or reject an article and kind of give the author a warning because they'd accidentally plagiarized, and they'd come back to me and say, no, I didn't. Like, I wrote this. What do you mean? And so I wrote it as I think there's two ways of plagiarizing. There's like the blatant, I'm going to steal this thing from a person, copy paste, and pass it off as my own work. But this concept of accidental plagiarism, it really, and I think a big part of it is cultural differences and the way that people think about ideas and ownership. And in East Asian countries in particular, some ideas are just recognized as universal knowledge and they're not owned by anyone. And if it's out there because it's, written up somewhere else, and that idea or those facts are yours to replicate or reproduce or kind of draw from, which is really different from the American mindset of being very individualistic and, this is my idea. And that's why we have copyright and lawyers. And I definitely don't think that either is better or worse. I kind of like the concept, the more East Asian philosophy that knowledge is universal and shared. But that doesn't work well when it's, it doesn't work well in the medium context. So what I really tried to emphasize there was the idea of crediting where you get information from, and making sure that if you write something, it's either something you came up with in your head, and that's okay. But if it's not, then the reader needs to know where you got it from. So that's, making sure that if you're pulling from a couple different articles for research, that's great, but make sure you link to those, or even explicitly say, according to an article in Business Insider, blah, 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 or from an interview I listened to on this, whatever, to not just kind of pull those pieces. Because we see that a lot where it's kind of just a bunch of different information, and they pass it off. The author doesn't mean to, but they pass it off as something that they've done themselves. But they're getting secondhand or third-hand information. And then also what we see is a lot of accidental plagiarism, or I would say more confusion about images. Like instead of pulling from Unsplash, they'll grab something from a really cool illustration on Behance, or they'll copy paste the cover image from Forbes about a similar story. And if it was created for, and that's more like stealing, because if it was created for Forbes, someone put work into that, they probably paid money for it, they probably have the rights to it. And even though you can copy paste the image, it doesn't mean that you have the rights to use it, even if you credit it to Forbes, or, that's still, it's not something that you own and can replicate and share. So I wrote it, to sort of have a gentle explainer, because it feels bad when you have to tell someone that technically what they did was plagiarism, and when they say, I don't think it was. And so I was trying to clear that up and make it more transparent, like what we're looking for and what is and isn't okay, and how to properly credit someone else for their work.
Yeah, that's so powerful and helpful, and thanks for sharing. I think especially the image thing, because I think that's a really common misconception, that you believe if you can just download the image and have a high resolution image, you might as well just use it and say, hey, here's where I got it from. I feel like that's a very big problem with images from celebrities. I don't know if you experience that with Better Marketing a lot. Do you have any specific sources in mind when it comes to celebrity images? Anything that quickly comes to your mind that we can share?
Yeah, celebrity images, I usually go to Google Photos and then do the drop down where you can search for a Creative Commons license. The Wikimedia Commons is great. They've always got something. I think often we've run like a weird amount of articles about Taylor Swift because she's brilliant at marketing and everything that she does. But there's like 3 photos of Taylor Swift that are Creative Commons. So we've used those, and then we run out. So I think also getting a little more abstract like maybe it's not Taylor Swift, but it's a unsplashed photo of a concert, or you know, like something like you're writing about her new album Folklore, so you take a picture of the woods. I think it's also, it feels more risky when you're using it as the cover photo, and the last thing you want is some angry email from a celebrity's lawyer saying that you need to take down your images. So I think it's better to play it safe, especially on the cover photo, and then see what you can find for Creative Commons. And that way it's more anyways, you know, it's not the same photo of Taylor Swift that everyone has seen because it's the only one in their Creative Commons, you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all those insights that you've gained. We have a few questions in the comments. This just is, I think, really interesting. We had a session with my students earlier today where we discussed this just like an hour ago, where we talked about, is it okay to make changes at an article after it's been published? How do you think of that at Better Marketing, or generally in the Better Publishing, under the Better Publishing umbrella? Is there any sort of rule you apply here? Is that an absolute no-go? Are there certain things that are okay, others that are not okay?
Yeah, I think there are certain things that are okay and others that aren't. I think it depends what kind of update you're doing. If you're updating the article's content to make the article better, I think that's great. It might be helpful to drop me a note or something about it. Like, it's like, I don't know, say you're writing about a new Instagram feature and then there's an update and you want to add a whole new section about that. Then I think that's good. And I think that sort of like long tail value of an article, it can be even more valuable to make that one article stronger than to write multiple articles with different updates. So in that case, that's a good strategy. More often, we get people who update their articles to be sneaky and self-promotional, and like, because we've got rules against how much you can promote your own work. We used to have a rule against any CTAs or newsletter signs up at the bottom. Now we allow one, but people will sometimes get an article approved and published with us and then retroactively add in, you know, their newsletter sign up link, or like 5 other articles they've written that's for people to read. And that's not good because it goes against our guidelines, but it also breaks the trust that they have with the editor. And that's not good for the editor-writer relationship. So it depends what kind of edit, and whether you're editing to make it a stronger article or whether you're editing to break our rules and go through us, you know, because we have rules for a reason. It's because we think it makes the articles better, not because we want to hurt authors. You know, we're here to help authors.
Yeah, and we cannot see the second part of that question actually, but it was, is it a need to inform before you make the changes, or just do it? And I think that's also sort of depends on the context. But if you know, if it's a change to the content versus if it's a change in the title, for example, what if a writer submits and gets published, and then they come up with a totally different title idea that they think would be better? Is it okay for them to change that if it's not sneaky and it's well intended? Do you prefer if they just change it, or should they leave a note or try to get in touch and ask you if it's okay to make the change?
Yeah, I don't know. That hasn't happened too often, or if it has, I don't know about it. Because the funny thing about Medium is you could make any changes you want, and there's no notification or anything. You could write an article for us and then delete the whole thing and say, Better Marketing sucks, and make that your article. And technically, there's no mechanism stopping. There's just the trust between the writers and the publication. So I think if it's a little change where it's wording, I don't think it's necessary, though I would be, like, from my own curiosity and editorial interest in learning, I think would like to know when something's being changed and why, and maybe there's something I learned from that, or an insight that the author has that we don't, about why they want to change it and whether it worked well. So I think a note or an email in that case would be helpful. Also just in case there's disagreement, it's something that they change. There might be something controversial in the wording, or something that someone sees as a small change might be a big change for us. So I think it's safe to try to over communicate.
Yeah, cool. There's actually one that I think is very broad, but let's see if we can answer it very quickly and shortly. Do you have any best practices of introductions? So the question is basically, what kind of introductions have higher chances of being rejected? Do you have examples? I think that's difficult. In case you have some, maybe you can share the names of the articles if you have it in mind. But generally speaking, do you feel like there are any best practices for specifically for better marketing introductions that you like and that your readers like?
Yeah, good question. I did one of the writing cooperative has like an Ask the Editors series where they ask editors questions, and this was one of my questions, was about introductions and what makes a good introduction. So I did a deep dive, and I can probably find the link to that. But it was fun to analyze what makes an introduction good. I don't know. I think there are introductions that are fluffy or kind of like long-winded, and I think people think they need to write more of an introduction than they do, and sometimes it feels like you could just strike out the first paragraph or two. Or if I think we get a lot of intros that are like broad speculative statements about the state of the world, like social media is everywhere these days, or technology is whatever, and those kind of make me roll my eyes sometimes. It's a little like, okay, we know that social media is pervasive, or that marketing is powerful, or whatever that point is. And I think that can be a little tiring to read over and over again, whereas jumping straight into the interesting point can maybe make me more interested in it. But yeah, I think you had Sean on last week, and he talks about introductions. He's got a couple articles specifically about introductions in better marketing, I think. He does a good job of like jumping to the point, or kind of like getting something that's intriguing or interesting or compelling and not fluffy and vague that everyone knows about. Yeah.
Cool. I just shared the link to the article at Writing Cooperative. So if anyone wants to dive deeper into that, check that one out, or check out what Sean has written for Better Marketing. That might be very helpful as well. One more that I think is actually really interesting. How often do you see articles of smaller authors do exceptionally well in better marketing? Do you recognize a pattern? Are you even aware of how big or small a writer is when they submit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I try not to be, I guess. I try as much as possible to not let it color my process. It's definitely not something that we use. Like, we don't say, oh, I'm going to accept this article because they have 20,000 followers, and so it will probably do well. And we don't say, I'm going to reject this because they have 7 followers, and so they won't do well. So I really try to focus on the quality of the article, and maybe somewhat naively hope that is the dominating factor, is quality as to whether or not it'll do well. I do think that when smaller authors, or authors that don't have a built-up following on Medium, those articles that do well, I see them often putting more energy into promoting it within what networks or worlds are relevant to them, especially if it's, something that they care about a lot. If they work at a nonprofit and they're writing about nonprofit marketing, and then they tweet it on their own like Twitter, share on their LinkedIn network, or like in their own professional communities, then that is really helpful, because I think that small engagement with tight-knit communities or people who care about it, sharing it even, in like a nonprofit marketing LinkedIn group or at work in Slack or something like that, that can be helpful. And honestly, I think even more so because people who are big writers on Medium, like their followers are kind of spread out and they have a lot of interests, and that can often be, it can kind of backfire. It can be less powerful than having a smaller community of followers who really care about what you're writing about, or the topic that you're covering. So I think, I guess, that sort of real interest and that self-promotion can be helpful, even just to get it off the ground or in the circle of people that might care about what you're writing. Because, if you write something if you write something you're proud of it and you want to share it with the world and with the people or the people who might find it interesting, and authors who want to do that and, will work with us so that we promote it and they promote it, and then we're working together to get it shared. I think that can have a huge impact.
That's interesting, because I think that's the more niche you are and the more specific the audience is, the more powerful that practice will be. Because an article on, for example, nonprofit marketing is not going to be relevant for everyone. But if it's relevant for you, it's probably going to be highly relevant, and you will be proud of sharing it with other people who might be interested and who might be in the same area or niche, or working in a similar, working with a similar intention like you do. And I think that's then less about like getting tens of thousands of views, but about increasing the impact you can have with an article. Because, well, as I said, there are way fewer people who are interested in it, but if it's really valuable for them, it can actually make a change in the way they work or in the way they spread their message and their work in the world. So that's an interesting point, because when it comes to getting like a lot of views and the internal virality on Medium, I believe that self-promotion is not that effective, or it's you cannot do that much about it. But in terms of reaching the right audience with a very specific message, I think that's a very nice way to do it. And especially I think on places like LinkedIn, for example, if someone likes your article or your post on LinkedIn, their connections will see it as well. And if it's someone who is working in the nonprofit world, they will probably also have connections who are at least interested in what they do and are also interested in the nonprofit world. So that can then spread on to the right people, probably not millions of people, but to exactly the people who are interested and keen to know what you have to say. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. All right, I think we covered most of the questions now. There's one more on when you reject an article, are you able to state why, or does it take too long? We already discussed that earlier, that it's, I think, just impossible, isn't it, to state for every single article. Do you have in mind how many articles you are reviewing per day, per week, per month?
It kind of varies, actually, and we don't track it, which we probably should. But I kind of just go through, and it feels like just chopping away at I don't know, like a plate of food that keeps refilling. There's always articles to review. So no, unfortunately, yeah, I try to give feedback when people ask. If it's something, though, that's already covered in our Write For Us guide, the submission guide, or in the style guide, I'll often send those links and say, due to the volume of submissions. I can't respond to everything. Here's our Write for Us guide. And I usually do that because there are things specifically that if they read through that guide, they would, find a few things where there are points for improvement or something that they've done that might be either against our rules or not what we're looking for.
Awesome. I just shared the Write for Us guides in the comment section. So if anyone has submitted, didn't know why you got rejected, that might be a great place to look in. And if you have not written for Better Marketing yet, but you want to give it a try, that's also where you can and should start. So Brittany already told me they're always excited to welcome new writers, new voices. Do you briefly want to share a pitch on what you're looking for so that those who jumped into the interview later know what you're looking for at Better Marketing so that they can create content that really fit your guidelines and your audience?
Yeah, sure. So we are a publication by marketers for marketers. We publish case studies, tutorials, advice, industry news, anything that would help someone who is in marketing or in a marketing role, say doing something to promote a product or themselves, freelancers, entrepreneurs, business owners. So we have a pretty diverse array of topics we cover. In particular, I get excited about things I haven't heard before, innovative marketing campaigns, marketing technology, things that are interesting or unique, augmented reality and QR codes in the sky, but also more accessible things that someone on a budget or a marketing team of one could do and implement today, and things that are achievable for you if you're not, the creative director at Coca-Cola or something. So we cover a pretty wide range of marketing stuff, but anything that would be helpful to marketers and interesting and inspirational is pretty much fair game. And there's a list of our topics we cover and the articles types, and then interesting things that we're interested in now, diversity in the marketing industry or how to make your marketing more inclusive is a topic that I've been trying to get more on. Things like adding alt text to your images or making sure that your campaigns are inclusive to your audience. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're looking for. I'm open to pitches. I love working with new writers. So I'm excited. Hopefully we'll get a few interesting submissions from this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all your insights, to share your experience with us. Thank you for being part of the community and the group overall. We always see really helpful comments and resources from you, and I'm always excited to see it because I think it's it's really valuable to also have some experts, but also just the other side of publishing and the publishing world as part of the community as well. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for doing this and for sharing all your thoughts with us today, Brittany.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in one of the next sessions. Bye-bye.